Good evening, everyone. My name is Nye Whitaker, and I'm proud to be the Executive Director of the W.E.B. DuBois Center for Freedom and Democracy. On behalf of the ancestors who constructed the Clinton AME Zion Church by hand and poured into it, building a community who prayed, educated, organized, served, and celebrated at our sacred site at 9 Elm Court in Great Barrington, I welcome you to the second in our event, the Reflections on Democracy series, as we explore Dr. DuBois' theory of community economics and the ways in which philanthropy can repair communities and strengthen our democracy. Thank you to our board and our committee members who are here with us this evening, to all of you, our donors and friends, and to Sally and Fred and Seth and the staff at St. James Place for your partnership. As we work together to uplift Dr. DuBois, our native son, his unique vision for our democracy, and acknowledge his global influence on its trajectory, there is much work for each of us to do to move our country forward. But one thing I know for sure that we at the DuBois Freedom Center believe is that we are committed to never going back. We invite everyone here today and those who are watching online to visit our website, www.duboisfreedomcenter.org, for details about our Reflections on Democracy public programming, and more importantly, to sign up for our future events and to make a donation to support our work to restore and reimagine Clinton Church. Donation envelopes are here on the seats and at the registration area should you need to use them before you leave today. But as those of you know from our Juneteenth event, before we get started, I always like to give you a preview for what's coming next. I would like to take a moment to extend a special invitation to all who are here with us today and those who are watching online to join us on Thursday, September 19th at 6 p.m. in the sanctuary at St. James Place, when the DuBois Freedom Center welcomes Tony and Grammy award-winning artist Leslie Odom Jr., who will join us for a conversation on democracy, education, and the arts. Again, please visit our website, www.duboisfreedomcenter.org, for details. Now, it is my honor to introduce the DuBois Freedom Center's inaugural visiting scholar on democracy, the Honorable Reverend Michael Alexander Blake, who will introduce our distinguished guest for this evening, Dr. Marvin Carr. Brother Blake, the floor is yours.
What up? Good to see everybody again. How you doing this evening? I'm giving you the heads up that I use my phone for my notes, but I'm also using my phone because at some point we're actually going to pause because I want us to listen to the president's press conference that is happening. Slightly important press conference around global democracy that is going on today itself. So we're going to flow and move in that. He's hosting NATO leaders in D.C. Today, so quite an important day. To that degree, our last conversation, can we get up for Nye again one more time, everybody? Right? Nye gave me the assignment. She was like, only bring great people. I said, I got you, and I got you, right? So last time, for those of y'all who were with us, we had an incredible event with Congresswoman Nikema Williams for Juneteenth. And we said, let's keep this energy going. And so when we were thinking through the themes of democracy and philanthropy, to me, in order to achieve both, you have to focus on equity. And so I asked for my dear friend and brother in the movement, Dr. Marvin Carr. Come on up, Dr. Carr. Give him a round of applause right now. He got all these fancy titles, fellow counsel on foundations and, director of equity at Walmart. We're going to go through it all right here, right? I also said to him something backstage. I was serious about something I'm going to ask you to do. Okay. Yeah, okay. All right. So we sometimes don't make the immediate connection that philanthropy is essential within democracy. But before we get there, we celebrate the name of Du Bois and all that we do here. And so I said to Dr. Carr that my first question to him is, I wanted him to say what was the meaning of his name. And I'm actually going to ask that for those that come after us as well, because I think it's important for us to ground in name. So for me, my full name is Michael Alexander Blake. My family actually named me after Michael Manley and Alexander Bustamante from Jamaica, who probably still are our most prominent prime ministers we ever had. And I was born Christmas night, which full circle to then become a preacher. I guess that was supposed to happen that way, in that regard. I get 2 gifts, by the way. I don't just get one on Christmas right there. You understand what I'm trying to say right there, right?
That explains a lot if you know Michael Blake.
Yeah, that explains a lot right there. I am a Capricorn in every possible way right now, right? So, Dr. Marvin Carr, what is the meaning of Marvin? And tell us about your personal journey before we get into the work you're doing, because I think that sets the ground on who you are.
You know, when you asked me that, I was like, I don't know. But I thought about it. And my name is, so on my first degree, my name is Marvin Desmond Singleton Jr. That's a story. But right now, my name is Marvin Desmond Carr. And
did y'all pick up on the subtle thing? On his first degree. Okay. I told you got all these titles out here. Yeah.
On my last degree, it was Marvin Desmond Carr. And thinking about that, my name means love to me. My mother remarried Walter Carr when I was 8 years old, who adopted her 3 children. You know, folks don't always do right, so something happened along the way between the Social Security card didn't get updated, and you know how that goes with our people. 100%. So I didn't recognize that until I applied for FAFSA for the first time, and I couldn't apply for FAFSA under Marvin Carr. So I had to use Marvin Singleton to register for school and to get FAFSA. It just took a long time. But for me, that means love, right? That someone, would take it upon themselves to raise another man's child. But also, it means reconciliation. When I became old enough, choosing for myself, I reconciled with my biological father, Marvin Singleton. And within a year of each other, I buried both of them. For both of them, one paid for the funeral, the other one actually participated in it. So I often reflect on that name, Marvin being the surname, being the name of my biological father, and Carr being the last name of my stepfather. So it's love and how love endures, and forgiveness is a big part of that. And so so much to that name, and so much to a name. So thanks for asking me, brother.
You got folks tearing up on your first answer. People out here already feeling like, okay, all right, we like this Marvin guy right now, right? So, in this journey, before you are at where you're at, give some perspective, the totality of the person. Who is Marvin before you end up in Bentonville? Like, just because it's an incredible, I don't want to say story, because to me story seems like it's some creative dynamic, right? Like, it's an incredible journey that I think is important here.
I'll tell the story about, and it's really weird how it happened, but one of the things that this is a goal of mine, is how to end the cycle of random acts of kindness, creating great people, and instead how to systematize it. And I figure out in all the spaces that I call equity sparks in my life, it was a random act of personal or systemic philanthropy. There's this moment in the first grade, so we can go deep on this one, but my high school counselor was also my first grade teacher. And I always share this story about my very first time, the first grade field trip. My mama couldn't afford to pay for it. So Ms. Cassandra Frederick paid for me. And that was actually the equity spark in my life, right? I remember watching a bunch of little kids at the Toledo Science Center in Toledo, Ohio, standing around. I thought they were creating lightning. But I would later learn that they were actually playing with a Tesla ball. So I remember my first time going to the Tesla ball, and the very first time in my life, having this awe, like I'm creating something, right? I thought I was creating lightning. And I went back to my grandfather, who was a General Motors employee, W.E.B employee, who said, no, that was electricity, and set me in front of an Encyclopedia Britannica. It's blue, and taught me Tesla. And that started me on this journey of wonder and just excitement around science. And so most folks, when I tell them that I earned a doctorate in engineering, they're like, how the heck did you end up in philanthropy? But my first love was science and mathematics. And it's these random moments, right? When I graduated high school and I was a Bill and Melinda Gates Fellow and Scholar, which immediately, right, again, these random acts of kindness, I knew leaving high school that I had enough money to get a PhD, right? And how rare that is. And the ability to go into school and not have to worry about how I'm going to pay for it, not have to worry about, having to work through school, but to spend my entire time in school on one thing, studying and building character. And how do we systematize that, right? How do you make that the case for every young person who comes to school? And that's really where the story begins, right? This ability, this freeness to dream that these, again, random acts of kindness allow for me to do. And so by the time I got into school and I, started to do things like this and watching and reading, it always pinned back to how do I do this for others? And so folks ask me, how'd you end up in philanthropy? My doctoral dissertation is titled Closing the STEM Gap with Culturally and Cognitively Appropriate Cyber Instruction in Mathematics. And it is a case study of an all-girls after-school algebra learning program. And I remember the day that I decided that was going to be my focus. I was working as a summer fellow in the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory in Maryland, and I hated it. I spent all my time in the basement of this huge building, and my job was to, not to get too nerdy, translate and transcribe Fortran code, which is the code used on the Apollo missions, into C+ code. The worst possible thing you could ask anybody to do. And every day I just cannot wait to get back to the girls program. And so that's how I ended up on this current journey, right? I decided that much more than I wanted to be an engineer, I wanted to help girls become engineers too. And so that's really what put me on this path towards philanthropy. And what happened was that research turned into a first job. My first job out of college was as a White House staffer, staffer helping the Obama administration in developing policy and programmings for girls and boys of color and women in tech and STEM. And I remember I never knew what philanthropy was, but I walked into an event the president was hosting in the Eisenhower Executive Office building in the South Court Auditorium. It was an event to introduce philanthropy and leading philanthropy to the president's My Brother's Keeper initiative. And I remember walking in, and I was with a friend, who's a friend now, Michael Smith, and it was very few people looked like me in that room, despite the room was supposed to be for boys who look like me. And I think that's when I decided that this is the space I wanted to be in. It was the end of an administration. I was over policy. I realized that academic work and policy work was what I wanted to do. Anybody who worked at the White House knows the White House ain't got no money. But these were the people who were deciding every day where their money was going. And to be frank, I wanted to be able to make that kind of decision to have impact. So hopefully that reveals the arc that you're thinking about.
Because I think it's essential. I think the roadmap of a engineering background, a STEM background, which obviously is very poor given all that's happening in the country and the attacks of DEI, quite frankly, right? Make you more able to be effective now in what you're doing. Because too often people look at philanthropy and any kind of justice-related cause as a feel-good as opposed to it's mandatory and necessary, right? So speaking about places that a lot of folks are not at and you would not automatically think about it, so then how do you end up at Walmart in Bentonville, Arkansas? Just help me understand how that path then happens right there.
Maybe my boss won't watch this. But coming from the kind of places I come from and the conversations that I have and my friends, when I first got the call out, the answer was heck no, right? And so two things. Following the murder of George Floyd, like a lot of corporations, Walmart did two things, actually, and I think went above and beyond what a lot of corporates did. In addition to making a public corporate commitment of $100 million over 5 years, and the focus of that corporate commitment was explicitly to address anti-Black racism and systemic racism in four systems: health, finance, education, and criminal justice. And so I joined Walmart to start that program. But when the company went a bit further, and what it did was, in addition to the philanthropic commitment, the company made an internal P&L commitment and started what we call shared value networks, SVNs, which are networks of internal executives who are thinking about how to use the P&L to drive systemic change through the P&L, through the company. So what does that look like? One of our focus areas was in addressing the inequitable outcomes for Black women in maternal health. And so while we're also providing investments and supporting on the philanthropic side, and through the company, organizations that support doulas, the company decided to start a very small pilot that provides free access to doula services for pregnant employees that are store-facing in a small number of stores. And again, it's using the company's P&L, using the company's employee benefits as a way to address for Walmart associates this inequitable outcome for our pregnant associates. And that program was successful, and this year we actually went from a small pilot to now a national program where all frontline associates who are pregnant people at Walmart have access to up to 10 weeks of online doula services, right? And so think about that. Walmart is the largest employer in the country, 1.6 million employees, of which you can think of maybe a third could be possibly be pregnant people. And what I realized, and the type of philanthropy that I'm able to do at Walmart, is in addition to kind of societal facing philanthropy, we have 1.6 million frontline associates in the country that every day we can do the work of ensuring that they have equitable outcomes. And so that's kind of the unique opportunity at Walmart. But the second answer is like, why'd you take this job? It took some convincing and it took some reading. And what I'll share with people is really two things. One is a speech in a conversation by Mike Duke, who is the previous CEO of Walmart, following Hurricane Katrina. So one of the most pressing and amazing photos in the history of the Katrina time was this photo of hundreds of Walmart trucks preparing to go into the Gulf. At a time when the nation's supply chain to the Gulf had broken down, Walmart had decided that it was its duty as community members to actually stand in the gap. And what most people don't know is that was a changing moment for the company. A lot of folks, and I can't argue against them, right, have a 1999, 2001, 1980 view of Walmart, right? And despite those things, right, which we can admit there were mistakes and things that happened that we know were problematic. Since 2005, since the regeneration conversation and our current CEO, the company has changed, and the company is changing. I mean, companies are what they are, right? That they are shareholder and or stakeholder focused. And I think what has changed since the regeneration efforts and our shared value efforts is truly a company that sees the value of the impact and can tie shared value to it. And so about 10, maybe 12 years ago, the company's new focus and how we show up in communities is around this pretty popular approach called creating shared value, which is a Harvard Business Review approach to how companies show up in communities. And for us, creating shared value is super tied to our philanthropy as well. And that actually, to be frank here, companies make more money for shareholders when they show up in communities in the space where the company can thrive, right? And so Walmart, as the world's largest private employer, as the nation's private employer, can show up in a community to run things like a program that I fund called the Unlock Potential Program, which is focused right now in 7 communities, building intentional hiring pathways for young people who are in the foster care system, in the juvenile justice system, who are survivors of trafficking or have parents in prison, and building intentional highways into Walmart careers for those young people. And so that's how we can show up in communities by using the P&L, by using the business to create value in communities.
And I want you to stay there. Another example that we talked about was El Paso. So how did El Paso create the impact of the work that's happening internally?
I mean, a couple ways. I mean, first, everybody knows what he talks about when he says El Paso. Wow. Maybe it's been 8, I'm not sure how long it's been, but one of the worst mass shootings in American history happened inside of a Walmart in El Paso, Texas. And we all know that the perpetrator of that shooting made it pretty clear that it was that hate was the catalyst behind it. And part of the work around in the shared value is, and it's evolved over the years, but right now we have some work in the Walmart Foundation that's focused on what we call caring and connected communities, right? How do we show up in communities to ensure that, really one thing, that people don't feel so disconnected from each other, that they can come into a store and kill 40 people? But also, how do we allow communities from different backgrounds who might view their roles differently, talk to each other, right? How do we share this idea of, no matter what you think about it, of a pluralist society and connecting folks to that? And the fact of the matter is, again, going back to shared value, right? Walmart is, everybody's backyard. You walk into a Walmart, you see people of all races, all cultures, and we want that space to be welcoming, and we want the communities that we are in to be connected and to not feel that they are disconnected, or that to be afraid of the immigrant, or be afraid of the black person, or be afraid of someone who might be from rural spaces. And so a lot of our philanthropy in that space is really focused on this idea of how do we build caring and connected communities to ensure that both our associates and customers and neighbors feel safe and loved and connected. And our hope is that through these investments, through this work, it's less likely that members of our community will commit such a heinous crime again.
But you all have recognized a caring, connected community. You can do good and do well at the same time, like at the end of the day. So just for perspective, the size and scope of the work of the foundation is what?
A lot.
Yeah.
So I think we spend in total, we do about $1.6 billion in giving, both in cash and in kind, across the world. Our annual grant-making budget can be between $250 and $300 million annually, both on the foundation and through corporate giving. And this work that we do, and our approach to it is, I won't call it unique because I don't want to call out any other corporate funders, but we approach it more like both a traditional CSR apparatus, right? Employee volunteerism, right? Helping customers give, but we are much more like a strategic philanthropic entity inside the company, thinking about how to connect the shared value of the company with community needs and national kind of systems change work.
I said to Dr. Carr earlier today that the first person I heard describe the shared values concept was actually President Clinton. So I don't know if it's an Arkansas thing that has been prompting that, right? But he said in a speech years ago, I think I was actually in Austin. I was in Austin, Texas now, and I remember that shared values and shared responsibilities lead to shared benefits, right? And that always stayed with me. I just thought it was just a very simply powerful statement that if you do all three, everybody can win, right? Which brings us to democracy, right? So why has democracy become a priority of the work when it comes to equity. Like, there are a lot of people that feel like, well, I shouldn't be involved, I shouldn't vote, I shouldn't do these things, it doesn't really matter. However, it's actually quite the opposite, right? Like, we do better as a society when we have a thriving democracy, right? We have better communities when we have a thriving democracy. That has now been something that is a priority of the work of what you all are doing. Why is that, and how is it being manifested?
I would take it outside of Walmart, just make it the more broader philanthropic field. And of all people, I'm going to talk about Rob Reich. I know Rob Reich. Rob Reich, one of the first books I learned when I got into grant making philanthropy was Just Giving. And Just Giving was really Rob Reich taking philanthropy across the coals. And one of the things that stand out to me in that book was his constant connection of philanthropy, personal philanthropy or organizational philanthropy, to liberty, right? In that, and I'll get to it. Okay, it's two things. One, that it's my money. I can decide what happens to it, not the government, right? As kind of the founding of personal philanthropy in this country, right? This is how Carnegie, right, started the modern philanthropic organization, right? It is my money, I made it, it's my decision what to do with it. But what that caused, though, was money that would have went to the Treasury for the government to be able to take care of the social needs of the community, instead went to individuals. So I think people often forget that, quite literally, philanthropy in this country is an offshoot and a child of our democratic processes, right? That, and I won't go into the history of like what the Carnegie, they call it the Carnegie Congress, did to make it even possible in this country to have a personal foundation. But quite literally, what the government and what the people said is that we will trust individuals and organizations to keep the money that they would have given to the Treasury so that they can do the good in society that they wanted to do. We can argue about the amount that comes off the top of administrative. I started my career as a government grant maker, and so trust me, it ain't better there. But quite literally, philanthropy exists because of democracy and democratic values and approaches, which makes it, I think, even more important to always call that out, that but for philanthropy, that money would be in the Treasury, state Treasury, city treasury, county treasury, federal treasury. And it's actually a part of the democratic process. And we need to see philanthropy as part of the democratic process, right? How we choose, how foundations choose to show up for democracy is super important. Which is why you have councils and foundations and all these lobbying organizations in philanthropy. Many of it, to be frank, is about protecting, often about protecting wealth.
Well, I mean,
right?
It is
Right.
okay for us to acknowledge that. Like, it is okay for people to make money and sustain wealth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And depending on where you are in society, like that is okay. But what do you do with that wealth and how you spend that wealth is literally an offshoot of a 1930s decision around Carnegie, right? That allowed for us to have organized 501c3 philanthropies or foundations. And again, a direct offshoot of democracy is philanthropy. And especially when you put it in the lens of liberty, in the way that Reich does and others do as well.
I mean, to that degree, when we started our Kairos Democracy Project, we had to be intentional of what accounts we created for that purpose, right? I mean, we have a 501c4 and we partner with a 501c3 because I did think and still believe it is important that in one degree you have to mobilize people around being registered to vote and broader civic engagement. But I also wanted to have the C4 because I do think it is important to be able to be very direct of the differences between candidates, even if you're not driving someone to go vote for a candidate, right? Which there is that line, right? Like a political action committee can go all the way, right? They can say, go vote for somebody, like a C4 can't do that. But you can say like, hey, there's a choice here, there's information here that you should be thinking about and being made aware of. And so to that degree, and you can learn more at the Kairos Democracy Project. That's my plug right there, right? You can find out about that, right? To that degree, how have you all been able to sustain success in communities, states, and countries, quite frankly, that have been undemocratic? Right, I mean, there is a incredible model that you have been able to be successful in building this out, and not just from making a profit, but also making an impact from a foundation and philanthropy standpoint.
I don't have the answer for that, particularly because my portfolio is domestic. So I'm not exactly sure how the philanthropic work shows up on international space. I can give an example of Canada, right, which is very different than America, actually. And
I mean, our food is better.
At the same time that the post-George Floyd movement was happening here in America, there's similar need for retribution and reconciliation going on in Canada around how the Canadian government treated Native Canadians, right? We all saw the outpouring and disgrace following the finding of the horrid experiences of Native youth in church camps in Canada, right? In state-run camps in Canada. And Walmart's response to that was similar to America, a $20 million fund, a philanthropic commitment to address those inequities. And I think showing up, right, even in Canada, where the community says to go, right? It was very clear that if Walmart's going to be one of the big players in the country, that we just show up in the spaces that the communities want us to be. And so I think, I don't want to speak for the across the nation because it might be very different in China, to be very frank. But in places where there are democratic, liberal societies, I think the company is able to show up in philanthropy in that way.
For you, in addition to his skill from an engineering perspective and a philanthropy perspective, we talked about philanthropy and the impact of culture and restoration of spaces and impact on community. So before you answer that question, I heard you can sing. That's what the streets told me. That's what the streets told me. I mean, if you want to, I mean, feel. I mean, the lights are on. I don't know why he looking at me like this. I told him I was going to ask him this.
I just didn't believe you.
Just give him a little something.
Here's a little something. You know, I'm a storyteller, so I'm gonna tell a story first. So a couple of things. I can sing, apparently. I'm from Detroit, so we sings in Detroit. But I also want to acknowledge my brother here. One of the very first introduction I had to singing was leading literary voice and sing at the Lamb of God, Church of God in Christ in River Rouge, Michigan. And not only that, but because of the way it was sang, I very early fell in love with classical music. And to be sharing a space, and a space so close to, where James Weldon Johnson spent so much time, is such an honor. But the story of the hymnal, I think, in the movement is important to me. And, one of my favorite hymns, I think really also explains why I do the work that I do. At Dr. King's funeral, Mahalia Jackson sang a song, If I Can Help Somebody. And I think If I Can Help Somebody really embodies philanthropy, embodies the important work that we all do to ensure that folks have what they need to survive. She sang, if I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word of song, If I can show somebody how they're traveling wrong, then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. If I can help somebody as I pass along, then my living shall not be in vain. If I can do my duty as a Christian ought, if I can spread love's message to a world abroad, if I can share somebody how they're traveling wrong, then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. Then my living shall not be in vain. If I can help somebody as I pass along, then my living shall not be in vain. And I sing that song often. I sing that song often because, and I get the question all the time. I'm going to get a little deep right now. As a black man leading in corporate philanthropy, it is quite a world where, like, I wish Dr. DuBois had an opportunity to study us, right? The feelings and the truth of double consciousness. I've read Dr. DuBois' dissertation. It shows up in my own dissertation. Well, the truth of double consciousness today is that somebody's got to do it, right? And one of the things that I think is important in his work, that he never said it was something that was bad. It's just the lived experiences of the people who are black in America. Not that it's good or bad, but no matter where you go in America, you're going to show up in places where the dominant culture directs you, and unnaturally you suppress your own culture. But I think one of the things that's very difficult, and it's important for democracy conversation, is the question of, but then what? And so the but then what is, for me, is we still have to show up in spaces where it can be uncomfortable to do the work, because no one else would do it. Like, I'm very proud of the work that I do. I think I shared with you that a friend of mine called me a pacifist. There were drinks involved, but we didn't go to blows. But it takes quite a bit of stepping back to actually, like, what does that mean for me? And I'm a person who believes that the essential joy of philanthropy isn't the redistribution of wealth, it's the redistribution of opportunity. And if I have to be in those rooms that are uncomfortable in order to share and create opportunity for more people, if they look like me or not, that's the room that I decided to be in.
Let's clap it up. And the reality is, you have continued to choose to do the work as many other places are disbanding DEI. I mean, we were talking about that earlier today. CNN just announced for yesterday today's Thursday. Yeah, yesterday, that they disbanded their entire DI program, which I think in large part is because people are afraid of lawsuits. I mean, like, they just don't want to say that overtly and directly, right? And you press into philanthropy, where a lot of times philanthropy is stepping into the gap that exists in a lot of different communities, right? How do you want to see equity be successfully manifested in your personal work? And I'm not saying that from a Walmart perspective. I'm saying this from a Dr. Marvin Carr.
Many things. I think, first of all, I want to be sure part of my equity work and my racial equity work, to be specific, is preparing the others, right? I'm 37 years old, right? I am well into my career, but I think about how to set up, I'm trying to say, how do I not get in trouble with this? How to set up the next generation for success, right? And folks like, you're always thinking about the next, yes. I have Gen Alpha kids behind me. You got a name for them already, it's Gen Alpha, I don't know if you know that or not. I've got Gen Alpha nieces and nephews. But my legacy and my space in this work, I'm gonna tell a story, I'm a storyteller. I know we got too much time.
We couldn't tell that he likes to tell.
So at the end of my administration, I took my two nieces to the White House. Gave them they had a tour. And one of my nieces, Deja, so she had to be 9 at the time. She said, "It's unimaginable, Uncle Desi." Family calls me Desi. I said, "What, baby?" She said, I can't imagine a president not being black." Right. And like, I didn't know what to say. Yeah. And I think we have such an important opportunity right now, right? Unfortunately, after that, we were thrust into this time of like terrible political retribution, terrible political division, where like I wish I could have taken that time to mold that, but instead we got this really weird time. But that still exists for so many young people who can never say again, a black person can't be president. And I think that is kind of the work that we're doing, like how to take this current generation, how do we, even the kids, right, the young people right behind me, and help them to hold on to this sense of opportunity and glee and zeal that many of us mistake for the TikTok culture, when it's actually this really interesting and awesome opportunity that they have to dream in ways we did not, or we don't. Like that's the space I want to be able to pick up outside of my academic or professional world, is how do we prepare young people for a society that works for them. So like this, and I worry about that. I think about that. It's not a part of my current philanthropic strategy, or I talk to folks, but it's something that keeps me up at night. Because the way that we talk about the young people today hurts my heart, because I know who they are. I know that this is going to be the most vibrant, brilliant generation ever, despite their addiction to TikTok, right? They are living in a world where they have, even for me, so much fewer barriers to reaching their full potential.
So there's a lot of parts within your response here. Dr. Cheryl Davis in San Francisco, she runs the Human Rights Commission. She says we have to give people permission to dream, right? Which the simplicity and the power of that sentence is phenomenal in its own right. For our next conversation, September 19th, with Leslie Odom Jr., as Nye mentioned earlier, to your part of your niece talking about the White House. One of my friends, all white family, lives in Chicago. He said his kids were looking up at a Hamilton portrait and literally said to him, or where's Hamilton and where's Burr? Right, like they were just thoroughly confused. And like he sat there and he started smiling, and they were like, well, aren't they supposed to be all black? Right, like what essentially, like what is this, right? Where, in addition to obviously Dr. Carr's beautiful voice, I do think art in all aspect is essential for democracy, right? And again, there's many parts to the story. We share the honor of being able to be a part of a presidential administration, which we said this earlier today, like it's hard when you're a young staff. I got to the White House, I was 26. Like it's hard when you think at that point, like what do you do afterwards?
I was 27.
Right, like when you work for a president, right? It's just like, okay, there is a lot more in life you're supposed to be doing from there. But the timing of you being a part of My Brother's Keeper and seeing that was essential because it's important. For those that are not aware, when President Obama started My Brother's Keeper, and it originated because what happened to Trayvon Martin, right? And you can't ignore that dynamic of this death, this heinous death here. I have to do something about it. A program for policies were established. It wasn't a feel-good, right? Which to me is the epitome of equity, right? Like, at the end of the day, I don't do anything about it for equality. I'm real clear. I tell people that all the time. I'm here for equity. I'm not here to distribute my resources and hope it works out. Like, there are communities that have suffered for long periods of time, and I'm gonna go help them. That's just how I operate. If you don't like that, you don't have to like me. It's totally fine. I win a lot. You don't have to, right? Like, so to that degree, for you in this environment, you and your team have to regularly assess state by state, city by city, the dynamics of what's going on out here, right? Because there are some states, let's be real clear about it, they don't want to hear a damn thing about equity, right? They're like, don't even engage in this conversation, right? Actually, we will criminalize it in many ways. You all and you have not been afraid. Like you found ways and you keep finding ways to engage. It would be helpful for the room here. How are you still having success in this challenged environment right now? Because a lot of folks are finding ways to run, right? They're using this, I'm just going to say, they're using it as a cop-out moment. Like, there were a lot of DEI programs, equity programs that were stood up, George Floyd. And the second there was a sense of, yo, I can get out of this. Oh, I'm good. Yo, let's get up out of here. You have not. Why and how?
Yo, Michael trying to get me in trouble, y'all.
I just gave him a layup
I know.
of a compliment of his work.
That's a tough question.
And again, I am only looking down for those that came in later because we're waiting to see when the president's press conference begins.
One thing that's very important to Walmart, ever since its founding and Sam Walton, is the company's values. And they show up no matter where you are, right? And one of the top values for the company is respect for the individual. And I think because no matter where you are in the company, you can be a bag pusher or the CFO. One of the first things you learn is that. And I think that is the core of the belonging strategy at the company, right? We don't have a DEI department. We have a BDEI department, belonging, diversity, equity, inclusion. We believe that to be the world's largest retailer, to be the center of so many communities, it has to be a place where people feel like they belong there. And part of that belonging is ensuring a diverse customer and associate base, equitable access to the things that the company has to offer, and inclusive decision making. And I think those are part of the core values tied to respect for the individual. And so because it is tied to our core values, they are evergreen. The way that they show up in communities, though, frankly, depends on the law of that state, unfortunately. But that doesn't change the core values. No matter where you go in the company, those values are the same. But the way that they manifest, to be frank, unfortunately, because of our democracy, because of how our country operates, depends on where you live. But what you can guarantee an associate or those involved in the company is that the values remain the same no matter where you are. That wasn't my scripted response, but I should have wrote that down.
No, that was good. That was good. And
Because to be frank, it's not just Walmart. Like I think about, I'm maybe getting myself in trouble now. Think about my colleagues who have to deal with what happened with Bud Light.
Yeah.
Or who have to deal with the Target situation. It's tough to run a business with a diverse customer and associate base in divisive times. Because you have to make sure that you have a business so that people can go to work. And you have to make sure that you have a business so that people can go and shop and do their things. And so I don't know, it is a special dance that is work in corporate giving and corporate spaces. But the fact of the matter is we have no other choice, right? We're the biggest employer in the country, in the world, the biggest company on the globe, right? And so there has to be space for diversity and inclusion and belonging if we're going to continue to be the biggest company in the world.
No question. And for anyone that may be wondering, and Dr. Carr alluded to this at the beginning, like any company, well, Walmart's had some issues. Every company does. You know, that's not his portfolio, right?
That ain't my job.
That's not his job, right?
I just get the money away.
That's not his job, right? So that's, to me, it would not be fair for me to be like, hey, tell me about what somebody else did out here. That's not there. But I would say, to your point of the states, I do believe, and I treat this similar to what happened post 2016 and 2017 with the Women's March, that when challenging moments happen like this, you do have to make a decision on, do we come together, right? And you can keep watching what's going on in other cities and states and say, okay, you know what? I'm either going to sit on the sidelines or I'm not, right? We were not talking about, I mean, democracy is effectively a top 2-3 issue anywhere in the country right now. That was not the case to this degree pre-Trump. Just from a data standpoint, it wasn't. Just for context, the number one policy issue across most polls is jobs and cost of living. However, the number one issue to the determination of who I'm voting for versus my opponent is democracy. Recognize that, right? And democracy means a lot of different things depending on where you're at. Because I'm a Dem, so I'll put on my partisan hat for the purpose of it. But on our board, we have Republicans and Democrats on our board. And I appreciate that the Republicans on my board say, hey, you need to understand that for some on our side, when they talk about protect democracy, that means black folk don't vote. And you have to at least acknowledge that this word does not have a uniform and universal definition, right? Like, it means a lot to a lot of people, which is why I think the approach that you have about belonging and values is essential. Because when you reset conversation of we should actually care about the same values as people, I start to operate differently around you. Right? And that's why I think your strategy is necessary. So my last one for you, you literally spend your days helping everybody else and giving out a lot to a lot of people. I would like for you to tell this room and this audience and this space how can we help you?
Nobody asked me in a long time.
And again, this is Dr. Carr, separate and apart from your day job.
Yeah. I think that's a good question. It's a really good question, y'all. Y'all want to help me out? Okay. One of the things that I am super passionate about is ensuring that young people can reach their full potential. I think that in this country, the way we define young people is too often by their deficits. And one of the pieces of my philanthropic portfolio is around how do we shift the mental models of this country when it comes to how we describe young people. And it's broader than the opportunity youth. I think opportunity youth is insufficient, right? But I think there's a way that we need to talk about young people and their access to opportunity that is not a deficit focus. I don't have the answer, and philanthropy don't got the answer. Even in my work to shift the conversation, I've realized that it is just not as much of as it's still deficit, but just not as deficity. I don't know a better word. Instead of talking about young people and their deficit, I try to describe their lived experience, right? And how to build policy and programming around the lived experience and not some made-up term like opportunity youth, right? And so there's a way that we support through programming, policy, and philanthropy a young lady who's a survivor of trafficking that we know because of her trafficking experience is more likely to go to prison, more likely to have these negative health outcomes, right? Her trafficking does not define her. We can't ignore that is what shapes her experience. Similarly for the foster youth, who for years have been in and out of the foster system, right? Them being a foster youth doesn't define who they are, but their experiences do. And so we really need to think about how do we talk about policy and programming for young people that doesn't bunch them into categories, but that takes into account their experiences. And I don't have the answer. I just know that where we're doing it right now is not right. And I think questioning how we show up for young people in policy, in programming, in philanthropy, in education, in healthcare, in the criminal justice system, I think we need to take a brand new, just erase the canvas and start dreaming about it again. There's a different kind of young person in the world today. They are as connected as ever. They are as brilliant as ever. And I think the way that we see them and allow them to show up in spaces has to shift too. But I think if we can start that in this room, right? And it could be because of where we are in the world right now, but no matter what room I show up in, there aren't young people. Unless it's a space curated by young people. I don't see young people. And I think growing up, I was always told, get out of grown folks' face, grown folks' business. But I think being in grown folks' business all the time is what shaped me. Right? And so I think we need to get more young people into our business in our faces and do it intentionally. So that's what y'all can do for me.
So we're gonna support Dr. Carr. Let's find ways that we're supporting the work he's doing for our young people, the work they're doing around economic mobility and opportunity, which has been transformational. Think about your friends and allies in other cities and states. Don't mess with the pastor's microphone right now. Right? Find your friends in other cities and states to tell them about the work that is happening, because I think it is essential to know this, to know what he is doing and the success that he's having for these purposes. And I just value you, man. Can we give it up for Dr. Marvin Carr? Before Nye comes up to our marching orders momentarily, say again?
I have a question.
Oh, she has a question. Oh, okay. This is about to get real good out here. Again, for anyone, if time is limited for you, if you did not hear at the beginning, our next event is September 19th with Leslie Odom Jr. So we look forward to seeing you and your family and friends here. And we want you to be a part of what we are building together within this program. Madam ED.
I actually, if you don't mind me the liberty, would like to ask you how you were introduced to Dr. DuBois, and if you don't mind sharing that with the audience here today.
Oh my gosh. So it's a great story. I'm a crier, but I won't cry today. And I mentioned her earlier, I had a 10th grade, I'm from Detroit, Southwest Detroit to be exact. And didn't grow up around a family or in a space or a time where we had the opportunity. I didn't grow up in Harlem, right, where, black culture and the movement and the struggle is on everybody's mind. Grew up in Detroit in the 90s, where violence and crack and all those things made it that we were surviving. Loving family, don't get me wrong. I know my family loved me dearly, but nobody was thinking about teaching me about the movement. My introduction to the movement came from this little short white lady. Her name was Janine Van Auken. She was my 10th grade literature teacher. And we read The Souls of Black Folk, like a lot of kids do in 10th grade. And I remember like yesterday, the first time of me reading the session of the training of black men. It's probably the first time that I ever saw the words historically black college. The first time that I think became a deep thinker about what it meant to be a black man in America. And I think even my mom, when she heard I was coming here, because I think I just opined about the work and about the book forever. And she was like, that's crazy that you're going to be going to this to do that. And I think what's important, like the journey that I've been on personally and professionally and in my research, has a direct line to this space. And so when I was asked to come here, it was just a moment I just had to stop. Like, I was doing things like in college, hosting at Morgan State, the Talented 10th Symposium. You can Google it, it's all out there right now. So at Morgan State and SGA, hosting the Talented 10th Symposium. Because it was the introduction of this work through this space that I think for the first time found a role model, although it was just through his books and through his teachings, about what I wanted to do in the world, right? And that was, how do I make the story of Marvin Carr not exceptional, but the expected outcome of folks from where I'm from? And I think that is the story and the movement of this space and of his work. Everything from this idea of community cooperative economics to ensuring that that our people have access to both the social, political, cultural, and economic capital, I think aligns with all that I am today. And so just thank you for creating a space for me. I think I'm gonna tell my mama that we're gonna get her the recording because she was mad and tell her about this event. And I'm gonna send this recording to Janine Van Auken, who I just thank so much for all her support and love. Yeah, so yeah, that's the...
We'll take questions.
Nye out here changing all the rules on me right in mid-real time. We have a mic here. If there are questions, we can take a few. I said to Dr. Carr on our way here that as we were trying to navigate the day on when to do this, we finally settled on today. I was joking in the car, like, all right, well, 7-Eleven, all right, Beyonce, dope song around that, right? A few weeks ago, we thought today was going to be the day of the sentencing, right? And now it's the press conference that has still not started yet, which it's not hyperbole to say what happens in this press conference could truly define the rest of his presidency right now. And so the fact that we are here tonight is not coincidence, and you shaping a belonging framing is essential as well. Please. And for the cameras, let's just identify name and organization so that they can hear that, please.
Rufus Jones, I'm president of the James Weldon Johnson Foundation. I first want to say thank you for your angelic tenor voice, and thank you for your baritone, excellent questions. I've been writing a lot of notes, and I kept changing my question. So in trying to, if you have any thought about how we can give access to the youth that you talk about to systematize opportunity, does it have anything to do with preserving these black places and spaces like the Clinton Church and other landmarks as artifacts, since they're less than 3% on the National Registry that are dedicated to the experience of African Americans? Can you, any thoughts on how do you expedite money? Walmart has a bunch of money, but how do you get money to Massachusetts, to other places and spaces dedicated to the African American experience?
But before Dr. Carr answers that, shout out to Marcus. Stand up, Marcus. Yes. Yeah. All right. There you go. Just, we will answer the question, but just tell them who you are. Turn around. Come here. Turn to the crowd. Tell them who you are.
The youth. We're talking about changing rules. Hello, everyone. My name is Marcus Smith. I'm a PhD student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst in the W.E.B. DuBois Department of African American Studies. And also a fellow for the DuBois Freedom Center, which I'm grateful to be a part of. So.
Wanted to give him the shout out because he's the one that gave us that data point today about the 3%. That I was like, okay, we learn something new every day. Dr. Carr.
That's a good question. Two things. So one thing I didn't share before coming to Walmart, I was a senior advisor. I did a lot of jobs there, but at the Institute for Museum and Library Services. IMLS is a very small but very mighty federal agency that is I would call the owner of several congressionally mandated grant programs, including the grant program for African American history and culture, the National Public Library Program, and so it's the nation's largest funder of museums and libraries. And in that work, which was really important to me, was a initiative that's still active called the Community Catalyst Initiative. So I would encourage you to look that up, Community Catalyst. And what that initiative did was support museum and library professionals in helping to operationalize equity and opportunity through library museum services. The way that we define museums is very broad, right? And it includes historic places, historic homes, aquarium, zoo, all those things. One of the things that I learned in that work is the importance, I think, of preparing and supporting the next generation of museum staff and workers. And I think that's an opportunity, right? How do we create space for young people to explore and experience the museum profession? But also, secondly, I think, is how do we prepare museums to show up in communities, to invite young people in, to teach and learn. That museums are not just spaces for physical objects. That absent interpretation, absent, to be frank, access I think the Museum for All initiative was one of the most important kind of museum operation in the last century, the MFA program. And so, yes, I think it's an essential part of this conversation. And it's also our culture, right? That the griot, the hold of our history, the sharing of our history, is important to Black culture, period. And unless we're intentionally teaching, preparing a next generation of young people to make sure that they're sharing the stories of Black people and the history of Black people, who else is going to do it? And so I do think it's a tool that can be used to advance that work. Hopefully I answered your question. Yes. Okay.
Other questions? We have over here. Right over here. And we just for the camera.
Hi, my name is John Spear, and I'm the chair of the board of directors for the DuBois Freedom Center and a teacher. And my question for you is around corporations and how they engage ethically with the communities around them. So recently we had Tractor Supply post on the Great Barrington Community Board that they were pulling back on their DEI efforts, and that's happening nationally with it. And it's a chain that largely serves white rural communities. So how can companies develop the will and capacity to be ethical and do what's needed for the future despite their customer base?
Well,
Lord.
oh Lord. The Tractor Supply issue is, I think, more complicated. And I'll tell you why. I think it's two things. And to be frank here, there's a difference between having an opinion and thought on DEI and racial equity and the law. And I think what folks don't realize and recognize is for folks in philanthropy, for folks in DEI, that the legal landscape today is very different than it was 2 years ago. Some folks have not been following the 11th Circuit case with, oh gosh, it's slipping my mind.
About Georgia?
Yes. The 11th Circuit case with Fearless Fund, right? A lot of folks don't understand the implication of the Supreme Court's decision about, in the case that was brought on education. And what has happened is deep fear, to be frank, and uncertainty. So I'm not asking for us to give folks grace in this space, but quite literally, legally, it has become much more unclear and difficult to do those programming. The Civil Rights Act of 1888 provided slaves, for the first time, the legal right to sue and be sued. Provided former slaves, the first time, the right to go under contract. But the way that a language showed up was race neutral. And if you don't know that, the case, I'm not sure if you've been watching it, like that is like the law that was used to protect slaves from discrimination in a current society is being used to undo many of those same protections, some might say. And that is just how the current courts are interpreting the law. And businesses are showing up based on that interpretation. And so I don't know if it has as much to do with values as it has to do with the connection and the intersection of risk and fiduciary duty. That's my very straightforward answer to that. Because the way that a company that is a national company shows up in this space is different than a company that's only based in Massachusetts. And it's just created a really tough spot for CEOs, for leaders, for boards, and I don't think that they should be demonized is too strong of a word, but the answer to that is that elections have consequences. And the way that the current judiciary interprets the law is highly based on democratic processes and elections. So that was not a decision by the Tractor Supply Board. That's just how they are showing up based on those things. So I'm sorry for not giving a very, very direct answer to that, but I think my comments people would be happy with my response. Okay.
The comment I made a few moments ago about what we thought today was going to be for the former president, while we have been here, Trump's lawyers have filed a motion to vacate all 34 felony convictions and dismiss the New York indictment based upon the SCOTUS ruling. Yeah, this is why democracy is kind of important right now, everybody. This is why we kind of need you in the fight. And let me say this, and Congresswoman Williams obviously spoke to a lot of this in the last conversation. It doesn't really matter to me what your party affiliation is. There is no justification for a president to be able to do anything he or she wants to do. Right, that's just the reality of it all. And the ruling, we talk about this, the next generation, my guidance has been to any of them who are considering to vote third party or not vote at all. I have said if there's any motivation that you need, it should be the Supreme Court. That should be your guiding light right now while you have to get in the game. Any other questions here? We have one in the back. Take the microphone back there. If you could just say your name, ma'am, so we can capture.
Wendy Germain. I live here. I'm not sure how I want to frame this. It's about young people, and having gone through, I'm old, having gone through all the time, work in civil rights, women's rights, do the young people want to hear from us about what that was like and why it's important? I mean, David Hogg is somebody that I know, and those kids are incredible. They're absolutely incredible, and I'm so honored that they're doing this work. But in general, when you want to work with young people, do they just think we're, a bunch of old people telling these stories about the 60s, or is it valuable, and how do we do that?
David Hogg is the young man from Parkland, right?
Yep.
I think it is valuable, but I think it is how we engage. That there is a difference, even as I think about how I engage with my grandparent, my grandmama, right? There is no enlistment, right? That there has to be an enlistment of young people today, right? So it's not just teaching, do this, do that. I think the enlistment of it, right, is important. So what do I mean by enlistment? You have to create the space both to teach and be taught, but also ask people, do you want to be taught? And it isn't a brain trick, but like people want to be asked, and young people want to be asked, not told to do something. And one of the things that enlistment is a type of democratization to ideas that does not happen, right? My approach to philanthropy, I think that there are a very, very unique approach to philanthropy. First, like, he's a weird funder. But there are two kinds of foundation people. And this is an example I want to give. That there's the one that says, I have $100 million. Your organization can convince me why you need some, and I might give it to you. On average, it's about 3% of the people going to get the money. But then there's the enlistment approach. And I stole this from Edgar Villanueva, who wrote the book Decolonizing Wealth. That there is a type of philanthropy that says, this is the change that I want to see in the world. How might I enlist you and get into that change? What that does is two things. One, I think it levels the power dynamics between funder and fundee. But also it gives the nonprofit the ability to say no that I am not aligned with that is not how I view the world. I think the same thing about how we enlist young people in change, and because they feel ownership over the idea in the conversation with us, right? They feel like, oh, this isn't just some older person telling me what to do. This is an older person inviting me to create change with them. So I think a lot of young people do feel like it's just a bunch of older folks and millennials now, but I'm now the old millennial, it's crazy, opining about the past, and blaming and scolding them. But the moment you enlist someone and give them the respect of enlistment is important. Because what I tell you one thing, that you will still be the elder. They still have that respect there. But I think it even deepens the respect between elder and yelder. We've been starting to call them in the OIF world yelders. The yelders in this space. So hopefully I answered your question. Okay.
To that degree, ironically enough, when I was looking down, they said it's going to start at 7:30, but Cornell Belcher, poster for Brilliant Corners. He's on NBC all the time. He has the incredible hair, right? The brother with the great hair and the glasses. Has just released polling that will be more public in the next few days with Democracy in Action. To your question, ma'am, about young people. And so he polled 1,000 Biden 2020 voters across the battleground states around their perceptions on social media and tech. And one of the most telling stats was that the young people had a higher concern of how big US companies and government were trying to control them than they did about China. And when you went into the data, it was because you all are trying to be all up on me, effectively, right? To the TikTok point, ironically, their concern was higher for Facebook and X than it was for TikTok around that perception of control, but even deeper of their concern of their data and their security of their data, right? And so using it to an example to the broader piece, these young cats are paying attention, and we have to respect them and listen to them. And when we do, it'll be for the better. It will be for the better. So with that, being mindful of the hour, mindful of the day, we love you, we appreciate you. Please encourage people to stay engaged, be involved, and protect and save your democracy, right? You have a responsibility to do that. One more time for Dr. Marvin Carr, everybody.
Thank you to Dr. Carr, to Brother Blake, and to all of you for being here with us for our Reflections on Democracy and Philanthropy conversation. The conversation continues again September 19th at 6 p.m. We will be in the sanctuary here at St. James Place as we reflect on democracy, the arts, and education. We are going to have a brief dessert reception in the East Room. We invite you all to join us and to visit our website. We have posted a quote from Dr. DuBois on his vision for our democracy. We invite you to read it, to reflect, and to add your hopes for our democracy in 2024 to the conversation. Please visit us at www.duboisfreedomcenter.org. Please consider making a donation to support these public programs so that we can bring them to more audiences and hopefully into our schools. Thank you all. Have a great night. Ashe.